Good morning. Well, it could be afternoon where you are. If you're on the East Coast, my name is Scott Stanfield, and this is the Modern Longevitarian. I noticed that the internet's been a little choppy in my little pre-session with Dr. Anthony J, and then watching the intro. So hang in there with us as it catches up, because sometimes it happens at the beginning of an episode. And this is the joys of going live. This is episode 67, How Estrogenetics Are Making You Fat, Sick, and Infertile. And I want to say thank you, first of all, to Johanna Distille with The Loaf, which is the first and only certified organic paleo bread company in the U.S. And she was on the show just last week, episode 63. And she's also here in Utah. And we buy and use her product, and it's super amazing. And I'm going to be one of the very first affiliates to sign up with her. So I'll put up a link for that and really start talking about the loaf and her cookies and all the paleo foods that she have, which are super clean and in a certified gluten-free bakery, which is amazing. And Dr. Anthony J is consults her and an advisor for the company. So I'm excited to have him on the show today so we can talk about these things. Also, I want to talk about welcome from the Spirituality Gone Wild Network, and welcome if you're watching on LinkedIn. And coming from Spirituality Gone Wild this week, we're putting the finishing touches on this book of secrets from the 20 plus co-creators inside of the Spirituality Gone Wild network. And they have shows just like this, but they may be on different subjects. And we all put in a secret of life. And I think that Dr. J has really lived into my secret, which is find yourself, then do you. And he is actually doing that on 100% level. And because what he's bringing to the world is super unique and super deep, and also wide, and understanding how these pieces can go together. And he practices it in his day, and with his family and himself. And he also understands the science behind it and does the research on that, and put all this stuff in his book, which is super amazing. I know he has other books coming out, and he's continuing going down the road. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring Dr. J on, and we can get started. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's my pleasure. And, we've been, I talked to, Johanna last week, and then she made the introduction. And then, I normally do, I don't know if you know this or not, but I normally do a solo episode on Monday. So I slid you in here. So cool. Instead of having to make you wait, because I'm booked out for like 6 weeks on my normal guest days, right?
Yeah, cool. And, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Because I was like, why not just like bring it in, like talk about the paleo principles and keto type of things, and then expand on it really quickly, since we had the introduction, right?
Yeah, Joanna's great. Yeah, awesome company, awesome person.
She has actually deleted the pictures I had of the food I made. Well, actually, my wife and daughter, I don't eat breakfast. I've been intermittent fasting for 9 years, but on Father's Day, they like cooking breakfast for me, right? And so it's one of those feast days for me, and they made French toast out of her mini loaf, right? And with keto syrup and those type of things, and of course lots of butter, right? So that was really good. And so that was the first thing. And then we have backyard chickens, and she's got the mini loaf, and we have these little miniature chickens that I made, had a little egg over easy, right? And so, actually I did it basted, right? So it actually looked sunny side up style. So it looked really cool, with that. So let's get into what you're doing. How did you get started in this type of research and studying estrogenetics that led you all the way to the book?
Yeah. You said she deleted those pictures, by the way. Were they on her website or something, or what do you mean deleted?
Well, I mean, I deleted them out of my producing type thing here, where I could put them up in here. So I still have them. I can send you copies of them, right?
Yeah. I was just curious. Yeah, I mean, I got started with the estrogens, really, and it's funny you mentioned intermittent fasting too, just to swing back on that. I've been intermittent fasting since I was 5 years old. So that's pretty hard to beat. And it's because I'm gluten sensitive. Right. And my parents only had cereal. I would eat breakfast. I would get a stomachache. I didn't know that was the reason, but I just stopped eating breakfast, and I'm glad I did. And I still to this day carry on with that. But the estrogens, really, it started in college. My very first semester, they had orientation, and they told us there's birth control in the drinking water, particularly in Florida, right? Because it's at sea level, and they recycle that water. And that was a shocker to me. I didn't realize that was a thing. And basically, as I went through my education, Boston University med school, on and on, I was doing testosterone research, active sex hormone research. I mean, I was just starting to pay attention to all these different chemicals that act like estrogen in our body.
Mm-hmm.
And I was realizing there's a whole number. It's not just one chemical. Like most people talk about BPA. And honestly,
Right.
most people that talk about BPA, they don't even realize it's bad because it acts like estrogen. But there's a whole list of other chemicals that are similar, and they're all acting like estrogen. And we're being exposed to generally 10 of these per day, every day, which is crazy. And, when you start piecing that puzzle together, obviously, I felt compelled to write a book on it because nobody else had. And there's a lot of experts just on BPA. There's experts just on, phthalates or parabens or whatever they are, atrazine, some of these other estrogen chemicals. But putting it all together, I felt like it needed to be done.
Right. And it does, right? Because, someone out there like me who's, not a doctor, but geeky enough to care about it and doing all those research, I'm having to like put all those pieces together. And, it could take me years to do it, where I could just go to your book and then go, okay, this is where I can start. And one of the great things about your book is that you have this, gold, silver, and bronze levels of where like, and I think the analogy that you use, like if you're a college student, you may start at the bronze level. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're a pro athlete making millions of dollars a year, you're going to do the gold level, where
Exactly.
you can, you're doing the carpets and you're doing everything, linoleum, and, and your deodorants and your toothpaste and the food you're eating, and every single piece of the puzzle. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So the other thing about this is that what I loved, I looked at your website too, because you have all these things listed as like what I use. Right.
Right.
And like everything from deodorant, sunscreen, toothpaste to the other end of the spectrum, like compression socks. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, just stuff
Yeah.
I like. Yeah. I mean, because people email me nonstop, at least before they used to, because now I have that page, but they'd say, well, what do you use for, what kind of water bottle? I mean, like babies, right? You have a baby, I've got 4 kids, you have a
Right.
child, and you say, well, what about the straw in my kid's drinking water? What about the nipple on their little baby bottle or whatever? All these plastics. And to find alternatives, it used to be really, really hard. It's gotten a lot better. But then the other aspect, I'm looking for stuff that's affordable, and
Right.
that can be challenging too. So to merge those two, and again, it's not exhaustive. There's a lot of good companies out there, but I tried to say, well, here's what I use, and I try and merge the affordability with the purity.
Right. And that's amazing, right? We do the same thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
here in Utah, there is actually a local company called Redmond, and you
Oh
probably
yeah.
have heard
Oh
the
sure.
real salt,
Oh
right?
yeah, for sure.
Yep.
I have some of
And
their Relight right now, the
oh,
electrolyte drink.
yeah,
It's
that
great.
stuff's amazing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. I love it. The lemon lime is like drinking like old school powdered Gatorade, but no sugar, and
Exactly. I know, it's addicting.
it is, right? It is. I got to the point to where it was like I was chugging a glass of it before I went to bed, because
Yeah.
I was thinking I was doing like all this amazing stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I noticed that, the toothpaste you have is Hello, which I've used before. The fluoride free is
Mm-hmm.
one of the brands.
Yep.
But we used the Redmond, they use
Oh,
bentonite clay to
yep.
make a toothpaste,
Exactly.
right?
I've had that stuff too. Yeah. It's like that brown stuff. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
That's good.
It's
It's
pretty nice.
good stuff.
Yeah, the lemon flavor is pretty cool, right?
Yep.
Is
Yep.
an odd flavor to have for toothpaste, but it's really cool. So the thing is that I've been intermittent fasting for 9 years, and at the same time I came up with this idea for modern longevitarian, and at the time longevegetarian.com was taken, so I was like, what can this be? And so I was like, well, there's just all these things in the modern world that people in the blue zone didn't have to deal with for the first 60 or 80 years of their lives. And, ancestral, if you think about like generations before, all the chemicals, and at the beginning, like talking about glyphosate and those things. And so your subject fits perfectly into the modern longevitarian, because if we want to, and it wasn't really about living to be 120 or Dave Asprey 180 or Tom Bilyeu forever, right? It was more
Mm-hmm.
about, my parents both got cancer at age 55, just a
Mm-hmm.
couple of years apart, because dad's, a couple of years older than mom.
Mhm.
So he had prostate cancer, chemo, surgery, and then mom had, uterine cancer and a hysterectomy, and
Mhm.
and dad's 72, mom turned 70 in April. So they both survived, right? And so it was really initially about extending a health span, and the positive side effect would have been lifespan, right?
Yep. Yep.
Because if I can take my dad's dad died of cancer at age 62, so he probably contracted it around in his mid 50s somewhere, right?
Mhm.
Somewhere there.
Mhm.
So how can I break this generational cycle? And so one of the things you've opened my eyes to is that we think of epigenetics or genetic expression as like an individual pursuit for my own well-being, but you talk about how what damage is done on stem cells, on the epigenetic expression now can carry to the next generation. So can we talk about that some?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why I moved to Minnesota from Boston. I was in Boston 10 years. I moved here because I was doing research specifically on stem cells. I get the stem cells from orthopedic surgeons at the Mayo Clinic, and I was looking specifically at epigenetics. But with the estrogens, it's particularly a problem, these fake estrogens, because number
Mm-hmm.
one, our testosterone and our estrogen are in a really delicate balance, and you don't want to screw up that balance. And one of the problems by adding these artificial estrogens to our bodies, you definitely lower testosterone. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's a major problem in our culture. It's been going on since the 80s. Everybody's testosterone just keeps declining and declining. I mean, in the 80s, the average male was about 500, according to the Massachusetts aging study. In the 90s, the average male was 400, in the 400s, like 4010 or something. I can't remember the number exactly, but in the 2000s, it was about 300.
Right.
And I mean, still, if you go to the doctor and you get like a 250 or 260 or something, they'll generally tell you that you're fine, which is absurd.
Right.
Um, and so, uh, these things are causing major health problems. And the reason it triggers your issues in your epigenetics, which are marks on your DNA, is because
Mm-hmm.
they go into your cells. So a lot of chemicals, they don't actually go inside your cells. They hit the surface of the cell and they cause problems. It's like ringing a doorbell. I mean, they can definitely disrupt what's going on inside the cell, but they're often staying outside.
Mm-hmm.
They're just basically, uh, like I say, ringing that doorbell. Whereas sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, all these fake chemicals, they can go right into the cell. And
Right.
that's unique and problematic. But not only that, and I'm sure you know this, but the DNA has its own membrane, right? Like cells have kind of like a pillowcase around them and they have a membrane. DNA has its own pillowcase. It's called the nuclear membrane.
Right.
Almost nothing goes in there. That's why it has a membrane. It's super stringent. And sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen, they go into the nucleus,
Mm.
which is crazy because again, most things don't go that far. Most things don't even go into the cell. Now we're suddenly going into the cell and we're going into the nucleus. And so you have the opportunity with BPA and all these fake estrogens to disrupt these marks on top of our DNA, which, as you're mentioning, that gets passed on to future generations, which is really, really powerful and problematic if you're screwing with that.
Yeah, and we didn't know about this, like I was
Oh,
born in 72, right?
yeah.
And it's like I remember multiple things, right? Like my mom was a lunch lady at my elementary school. So she knew the lunch ladies at my middle school because they're in the same district, and then the high school. I didn't take lunch, right? To school. I had to eat school lunch.
Mhm.
And who's in the high school back, late 80s, when I graduated in 1990, had a hamburger french fry line every
Yeah.
day,
Right.
right? So I'm eating whatever that burger is with that bread, with the trans fat french fries, high fructose corn syrup,
Yeah.
ketchup
Yeah.
every day, except when they had pizza, those little rectangle pizzas in the other line, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Or when my mom took her mother-in-law, which is my grandmother, to the to the doctor or hospital, she would bring back for us as a treat, grandma would McDonald's. And I remember like falling in love with the McRib sandwich, right? It's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
those type of things, right? And
Who
so,
wouldn't? I mean, every kid would. Every kid would do that. And it's almost problematic to tell the kids that's bad because then you start developing eating disorders and things like that. So like if you have those choices for kids that are super easy and streamlined, of course they're going to choose them. It's
right.
frustrating.
Well, they are, right? And so I think that it is very frustrating because they're so prevalent, right? It's
Mhm.
like And as you could do a lot of, right things. My wife was, pescatarian for 30 something years before we started on the Weston A. Price protocol and added
Mhm.
some meat and things back to our diet.
Yeah.
And the reason we did is because my wife, neither one of us had any dental problems, didn't need any braces or any of those things. But our firstborn needed braces,
Mhm.
right? And for her, not, it's like, okay, we're looking at like what did we do generationally, right, to
Yep.
cause that first
Right.
generation to need braces.
Mhm.
Then my daughter, as she was 4 or 5 years old, was having really bad cavity problems. And we're like, okay, what
Mhm.
did we do? And then we realized maybe the fact that my wife had been mostly vegetarian with some fish for, at the time, 25 years, right?
Mhm.
That may have been carried over into that. And I had been a vegetarian probably 5 years at the time because both of my parents had cancer, right?
Sure.
And and we lived in the Caribbean for 2 years. So
Hmm.
we weren't like 100% organic. We weren't, it wasn't like there was a Whole Foods on St. Croix, US Virgin Islands, to
Right.
go buy all this stuff, right? So we're having to, and I've worked in the restaurant business for all my entire adult life. So before I was
Mhm.
intermittent fasting, I was eating all of that stuff at work, and I was 40
Right.
pounds overweight a couple times, and so
Mhm.
it's kind of really. And so we went to Weston A. Price diet, and then we things started happening. My son, got calmer, right, because of higher fats and those type of things, and we started seeing these things really, coming into fruition because we could now get grass-fed meats, right, where before we
Mhm.
couldn't, right?
It's a good
More wild
choice.
caught seafood, those type of
Mhm.
things, and so
Mhm.
we could start, you know, sides, you could put my wife loves animals, right? So that's one of the reasons why she doesn't like eating the meat, right?
Mhm.
Eating meat, the meat. I don't know why I'm calling it the meat, but meat.
Mhm.
But then it's like for me, it was like, okay, it's unhealthy because it's like, what's in feedlot beef and stuff like that. And so I know you talk about what's in like the blood of feedlot animals. So maybe if we could
Right.
tell people why they need to be having grass-fed meats, right? Because I know you talked about that a lot as
Oh
well.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Because I mean, atrazine is the second most used herbicide in North America.
Wow.
Um, yeah, after glyphosate, Roundup, and
Mhm.
it's a problem because atrazine is literally illegal in Europe. So they allow zero in the drinking water. They don't allow you to spray it on anything. They don't allow it. Period. It's bad for you. I mean, an example of how bad it is if you put a male frog, in a glass of water or just in an aquarium, whatever, and it has 200 nanograms per deciliter of atrazine. Just remember the number 200. It's got 200 units of atrazine. You'll
Mhm.
turn that male frog into a female. Uh, yeah, yeah. This Alex Jones picked up on this a long time ago, and he was talking about frogs being gay and everything else. It made a lot of headlines, but it's sort of true. I mean, you're literally transforming these frogs. But the really crazy thing to me, I mean, that's 200 units. In America, they legally allow 3,000 units of atrazine in our drinking water. So is that a problem? For sure. But not only that, these feedlot cows, the meat, they've tested the blood on feedlot cows. Again, they're packing them with corn for a couple weeks, fattening them out. And they're getting fat because they're inflamed and it's garbage. It's bad for these cows. But
Right.
they've tested the blood and they find 700,000 nanograms per liter of atrazine in their blood, or 700,000 units of atrazine, which is insane. And you can't cook this stuff off. I mean, they've done studies looking at breakdown like of BPAs and like these plastic chemicals and these atrazine chemicals. They're specifically designed not to break down under heat.
Mhm.
So like a lot of natural chemicals, if you cook it enough, like soy is a good example actually. I don't think soy estrogen breaks down with cooking. It still is estrogen. But if you naturally ferment the soy, you've got these microorganisms that break it down. So like soy sauce is fine because there's fermentation. As long as you get real soy sauce, there's no
Right.
estrogen there to speak of because you're breaking down the estrogens with those microorganisms. With these plastics, that doesn't happen. With these
Right.
atrazines, these fake chemicals, doesn't happen.
Right. So we if we get soy sauce, for me, it would be like organic, gluten free,
Yep.
and then
Same.
take the plastic little governor off of the top of the bottle, so we don't have, if there's any BPA in the plastic, right? So just be careful when you pour it, so you don't get too much, and mess up the balance of your dish, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, one of the things you don't know about me is that in my restaurant world, I've worked at 3 USDA prime grade steakhouses, right?
Of
So 100% feedlot beef, right?
course.
Increasing the sales, winning awards, and all those type of things. So if anybody's watching that actually ate any steaks that I helped serve, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, for that, because it's it's because you think about when you're serving a USDA prime grade steak, and let's just break this down for a minute. It's not organic, it's not farm raised, it's not, a pasture raised, it's in a feedlot, and they'll even tout to you that it has prime
Farm.
grade has more marbling, right? Marbling is the amount of flecks of fat in the inner muscle, and the toxins are in the fat, right? So you're eating more of that, especially if you get a ribeye, because that has the most marbling of any and the most flavor of any of the steaks. If they cook it in 1800-degree broiler, it's not killing the chemicals in there, right? Breaking them down or any of those things. If you get it raw, right? It's not raw but rare, right? It's even getting more of the blood, right? Because it's not as dried out, right?
Mhm.
And on top of that, they're going to tout like this may be they may finish this with grain, right? For like, it's a good thing for
Right.
like 365 days or 385 days. But if they
Mm.
go much longer, that cow actually would die because it can't live on the grain for
Yep.
that long, right? So
Yep.
it's inflamed, it's fat, it's overweight, and you're like going, and can you get some extra butter on top of this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
right, that has growth hormones in it and stuff like that, right? So it's all those things happening and compounding, right?
Oh yeah, and these chemicals store in fat. They do two things, and I talk about this in the book, and I call it the estrogenic paradox, because number one, they the chemicals store in the fat cells, and then number two, they tell your body to create more fat cells or store more fat. So they actually make you fat, and they store in your fat, which makes it harder to lose weight ultimately, because you got all these chemicals sitting in your fat. A good example of that too is like women that get pregnant, because when you get pregnant, natural estrogen goes really high. And that's a good thing, that's fine. And that's because our ancestors didn't always have access to food. So
Right.
natural estrogen goes up, you get more fat storage. If you don't have food, the fetus doesn't starve, you've got energy in your body. But nowadays we don't have a problem with food shortage, hopefully, and most people. And so this natural response to storing more fat isn't really necessary, but it still happens, right? When women get pregnant, they store more fat. They'll be the first to admit that and talk about it and lament about it. But the fake estrogens, these artificial ones like atrazine, like whatever, all these, they do the same thing. They tell your body to store fat. So whether you're a man or a woman, they're telling your body to store more fat. And a really good example of that, I'm sure you're pretty familiar with, like all this talk about counting calories, and you just need to count calories. In the medical community, the doctors will generally tell people, if you want to lose weight, count calories, decrease your calories, etc. They did a study with 2 groups of rats. One group, the only difference, they have all exactly the same calories, but one group, they put low dose atrazine in their drinking water. And of course, I emphasize low dose because that's the amount a lot of people are drinking in their drinking water. That group of rats got fat. So all the calories were the same, but you got one group that's fat, one group that's not fat. So it's triggering your system to store more fat. And again, like you mentioned, right, like it's storing in the fat cells. So when you're eating these steaks or whatever, you're getting more of it if you've got these unhealthy fats. So there's a huge importance, the big distinction between what types of fats you're eating. And the scientific studies don't reflect that very well, because they're not specifying when they're studying, like lard versus soybean oil or something like that. They're not saying like, oh, this lard was stored in plastic, or this soybean oil was stored in plastic, or this lard was from grass-fed cows, or this lard was from grain-fed cows. They're not making any of that precision or those precise distinctions. And therefore, it's screwing up a lot of the scientific research and confusing a lot of people, honestly, including scientists.
It's all confusing, right? Because you could even break it down, to, and I learned this from Dr. Mindy Pels, and I don't know if you know her or not, but she does a lot with keto and intermittent fasting and has a
Mhm.
big YouTube following, and she has this resetters group
Mhm.
and does a lot of work with, women in terms of like cycling keto and those type of things. But, even like, it's really weight loss is more of a hormone aspect, especially with like insulin responses and those type of things. Where
Right.
like if you spike your insulin, it takes so long for you to come back down, like 13 hours. That's why a 16-8 intermittent fasting works so well because, especially in combination with a lower carbohydrate lifestyle, you're not spiking insulin unless you're super stressed
Mhm.
or lack of sleep or something like that. And
Yep.
so, but the interesting thing is that there's another whole big wrinkle in this, which is what you're talking about, is the estrogenetic aspect of weight loss. So basically, if you're consuming a lot of food or drinking water, with or having lifestyle choices like with deodorant or toothpaste or BPA or whatever one molecule they changed, to make it where it's not BPA anymore, but they can say BPA free, right?
Right.
You're basically making our bodies, male or female, like we're almost pregnant and that we need to add fat on, right? Is what the signal is coming out. Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah, and honestly, before I wrote my book, people weren't even aware that BPA free is just as bad. And now people are getting it. People are starting to pick this up, but there's a lot of plastics out there. They say they're BPA free, but then the company uses BPS, which is literally just as bad. I mean, there's studies that talk about this. It's just as estrogenic. It acts like estrogen just as much. Um, and if they make BPS illegal, they can make BPF, and they can literally just go down the alphabet and just keep making these bisphenol chemicals that are just a little bit different. It's like manipulating steroids for the drug tests. And
Right.
I mean, you can make plastics that don't have artificial estrogen. It's possible. People do it. Um, Joanna's company does it. Like if you need to use plastics and you need to put something in a plastic, you can definitely find them. It
Right.
costs a little bit more, but it's not like plastic itself has to be full of estrogens, but honestly, like 99% of them are. And it's such a problem. They've even done studies on children's daycare facilities in California just because of the
Mm.
air quality. They have so much plastic. They got plastic mats on the entire floor. They got plastic slides, plastic everything everywhere you look. They tested the air and they found just breathing the air was a massive risk for cancer. And like literally cancer they were talking about. And that's a really, really high level. I mean, usually if you're in the cancer levels, the cancer causing levels, it's like insanely high. That's way beyond where you want to be for health optimization. I mean, it's just crazy. And that's just
Wow.
that one chemical, just phthalates.
Right. Yeah, that goes back to, you know, to the old saying, just, get outside and breathe some, fresh air, right?
Yep.
Go to the beach in California or here in Park City where I'm at 7,000 feet in the mountains.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So we had a couple comments come in. One is from a Facebook user said, "Yes, the lives of cows are so incredibly horrific. Tell them, Dr. J." Right.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
it's it's all this, it's all connected. It's like you feed them a bunch of garbage and then you treat them like garbage. It's not good. Yeah, it's funny. I was just in Salt Lake City. I was giving a talk, I don't know, a couple months ago. I was just looking up Park City because you're pretty close to Salt Lake, it looks like.
yeah. I commuted to Salt Lake. It's just from my house because I live on the outskirts of Park City.
Okay,
Um,
cool. Ave
and
Maria. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So my it's 30 minutes to Salt Lake, which
Nice.
that's what
Nice.
makes Park City so like if you're going to go skiing somewhere, normally you got to land and get in a plane and go get in a car and go 4 hours.
You're right there. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're 30 minutes. I can be at the airport, in 35, 40 minutes, and so that's
Right.
what makes Park City such an amazing place. The pass is called Parley's Canyon, and it's a
Okay.
3,000 foot pass to get up
Nice.
and up and down. And I
Nice.
commuted down to Salt Lake for 6.5 years.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was a director of restaurants at the Hilton
Oh yeah.
downtown, and then I was
Interesting.
director of food and beverage at the
Yep.
oldest hospital in the state of Utah. It was the old Holy Cross Hospital. It's now called Salt Lake Regional Medical Center, and I was there for 3 years.
Nice.
So that's where I worked when I lost my 40 pounds the second time at age 40.
Mm-hmm.
And I was intermittent fasting, reading about that's the beginning of the bulletproof diet with Dave Asprey. That was, those type of things. And yet I'm in a world where it's like American Dietetic Association diets and, all the ADA stuff. But I learned a lot about, like cardiac diabetic diets. And I learned a lot about, what the traditional, when I say conventional way of handling that in modern medicine is. And then what was emerging with this all like fat adaptation and listening to Dr. Stephen Finney and, those things. And so I really learned a lot. It was great educational. The dietitians there, the main one was Dion, and she's a Ph.D. And so they would the dietitian would sit down to eat lunch, and I would sit down and I would pick their brain all as much as I possibly could.
Right.
And I was reading diet books a week, right? It was pretty crazy, and
it's good.
but it was, and that really was like a huge catalyst in the leap forward, as to where I am today, with that. Joanna's made a couple comments as well.
Right.
So she's watching the show, right? And one of them is, while the info on Astrogene experiment is huge, and then she put her plastic in. We use a polylactic acid, so PLA material to package our products. Is like an estrogenic plastic, but it's more crinkly and louder, right? And I'm just having to read that from on the right angle. And it's when you start really looking at what foods are in, like you buy a prepackaged salad, right? It's in a plastic, right?
Yeah.
Unless it's in a plastic that's made from corn. But does that corn, raised with, glyphosate, right? It's like, so what is leaching out of these plastics that are, in that? Or if you take an avocado and you don't want it to brown, you eat half of it, and you wrap it really tight in a plastic cling wrap type thing, or in the restaurant we call it film wrap, right? You're wrapping that in something that's going to be basically leaching into the air, this, and it's going to be absorbing into the avocado. So there's all these things that are really going on there.
Yeah,
I think we can go on for the rest of the time scaring the crap out of everybody, right? So let's start now with what they can do to like sidestep this glyphosate type and estrogenic type thing, and what they can do in their changes. Like, maybe start with what you use, but then what like is maybe the bronze level. You could sum it up in a couple minutes. We can what can they do to help avoid these things and sending the signals to their body that they need to store fat because their estrogen levels are pregnancy level.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You definitely don't want to be storing liquids in plastics. Certainly not hot liquids. I mean, that's where you get the most transfer. When you have something that's oily, hot, and it's in a plastic container, you get a lot of transfer of these estrogens into the plastic. If it's dry, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, if you're putting a dry potato chip in a plastic bag or whatever, you're not getting any transfer. Well, you might get a little tiny bit, but it's really not impactful. But you start putting liquids, particularly oils, like if you put olive oil in a plastic container, you get a lot of leaching of those estrogens. Whereas if you put water, it's less, but it's still water. It's still a liquid. It's not oily. So there's less. But so I think the two big targets, if people want like major targets, I would say drinking water and personal care products. Those are the two, because a lot of people surprisingly still don't filter their drinking water. And the municipal system is not even trying to filter out BPA and all these other things. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're good at killing virus. They're good at killing bacteria and getting all that out. Those are big relative to hormones and relative to these single molecules. And they're good at getting those bigger chunks and bigger particles out. But they're terrible at getting birth control and BPA and atrazine and all these chemicals out. So you've got to filter your drinking water at home. It's got to be activated charcoal. You got to have a filter with activation, and most of them have it. So it's not like I'm asking a lot. Just don't filter it and then put it in plastic. I mean, that's where a lot of people go wrong.
Right.
So
it's just you're filtering it, you're taking out those things, but then you're adding them right back in, right?
Exactly. So depending on how long you've got it sitting in the plastic, you're adding more and more and more. And so what I do, I mean, honestly, when I travel, sometimes I bring one of those Brita pitchers, and it is plastic because that's all you can get for traveling. And then I filter the water and then just pour it out into like a glass pitcher or a stainless steel or water bottles. I have a whole bunch of those. But now I've gone to like a big stainless steel container that I literally drilled into it and put a spigot into it for when I'm camping and stuff, so I can bring water and it's not plastic. But most of the time, if you're traveling, it's not that big of a deal. Once in a while, I get some plastic bottles, not that big of a deal. It's just every day people are putting water in plastic bottles. They're not filtering it. There's some crazy things that people are doing that does ultimately lead to long-term issues. So water, big target. Personal care products. Be really, really careful with personal care. I mean, I'm sure you know this. You know, so many of them, they use the word fragrance on the label, and they'll hide all these chemicals in that term. They're legally allowed to put various chemicals into into those fragrances, and they don't even have to list them on the label. So you can't even determine whether or not they've got estrogens, fake estrogens, because they don't have to put. Sometimes they're on the label, in which case, obviously, avoid those chemicals. But if you're not sure, just get fragrance free. If it's fragrance free, it's pretty hard to cheat, you know. So fragrance free laundry detergent, all that kind of thing. Dryer sheets, be careful with all that stuff. The personal care stuff that you're rubbing on your skin, be most careful with, because it goes through your skin. It's like a hormone patch.
Right. And what people don't even think about too is like, organic clothing, organic cotton, non-organic cotton, those type of things, the chemicals, all that are on clothes.
Yep.
And I even have heard you talk about where on children's clothing that in the US we're required to spray them with flame retardant. Yep, which is illegal in Europe. They can't even use it, right?
Exactly. It's so screwy. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy. We did have a question come in. John Jensen says, does Dr. J have a certain diet he prefers? Keto, paleo, ?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, honestly, so I definitely do eat fairly paleo, and I even cycle in keto pretty regularly. I do like 6-week bouts of real strict keto, but I also do DNA consulting, and I look at people's genes and I say, well, like you do better with this, some people do better with that. And I try and make it more specific, because like just generally saying one diet works for everybody doesn't work. So when I do DNA consulting, I'm looking at different genes and how you handle dairy, for example, or other things, and trying to make it more specific, especially in terms of different vitamins that your body requires versus other people. Like a good example of that is beta carotene, right? Like a lot of people, they don't convert carotene to retinol very well. And carotene is found in plants. It's found in, they named it after carrots, right?
Yep.
And you can eat all kinds of carrots, but if you don't convert carotene to retinol, you're really deficient in vitamin A, because your body doesn't use carotene. They call it a vitamin, beta carotene. They call it vitamin A, but it's not really a vitamin, because your body doesn't even use it until you convert it to retinol. And so if you've got a problem with that conversion, a lot of people do. Well, eating carrots isn't really solving any issues, but eating liver is, because liver has a lot of retinol. So like that's one example of like customizing diets, because if you don't have that gene, you shouldn't even be thinking about that. Who cares? You can eat carrots, you can have whatever, you're getting your vitamin A from all kinds of different sources. But if you have that gene, suddenly it's a tricky thing, because in our culture, nobody's eating liver.
Right. Exactly. Right. And there's one company, I can't remember the name of it, but they have like this like jerky liver, right? And it talks about all the vitamins in that. And I haven't tried it yet. I've seen it only online. I haven't gotten it, but I'm the same way, right? I started intermittent fasting, like I said, 9 years ago. And then I started the Wim Hof method 5 years ago this month. And I had listened to Dr. D'Anestigo on the Tim Ferriss show. His talking about the ketogenic diet, and that was like November 5 years ago. And so what happened was I did the Wim Hof method, and I started craving fat, and I was smart enough to know that if I'm craving fat, no matter if I was eating organic, wild caught, all those type of things, is that if I started eating the fat that I was craving and keeping my macro of the carbohydrates high, that I was going to start gaining weight. So I needed to find a balance with that. So I was like, well, let me just keep going down this Wim Hof trail, right? Because I live in the mountains, 7,000 feet. It's cold. There's 2 seasons in the Rocky Mountains, right? Winter and July.
Yeah.
That's it,
Yeah.
right? And so it snows. It snowed on June 8th. This year it snowed on June 8th. We got like 8 inches of snow, right?
Wow.
And so where most people are like at the beach or at the pool, we're shoveling snow and dealing with that, a lot of times. And it's cold a lot, like in the 30s and 40s, even in the months it's not snowing. So I
Mhm.
was like, let me keep going down this trail of adapting to the cold and doing that, and then and go keto and combine that with intermittent fasting 5 years ago. There were no, paleo, the loaf. There was none of that stuff in the store. There was no fathead dough recipes. There was none of that stuff was around 5 years ago.
Mhm.
And, my point being is that I love keto. I feel amazing in it. I cycle out a little bit about every 2 weeks. I'll have some sweet potato, right? Do those type
Yeah.
of things
Carve up.
to
Yeah.
cycle out.
Mhm.
But I don't recommend it for everybody because I don't know where they are and what works for them. And like even my wife, she's more Mediterranean. She eats pasta, she eats pizza, she eats those things. She eats lots of vegetables, not as much meat. I feel better when I eat more meat. I mean, I just do, right? And
Right.
so even though I do all, I'm not carnivore by any means, right? Because I mean, behind me you can see I've got like the Ketotarian, plant-based keto book, right? I've got Dr. Terry Walls. I've got the longevity diet. I do fasting mimicking diets, and I'm 100% plant-based,
Right.
for runs of it. So I'm very flexible in those things. And it also helps me with coaching my clients, right? Because I can, like, I've lived their diet. I can give them recipes. I can,
Mhm.
help them with those type of things, depending on where they're at. But
Yeah, intermittent fasting is probably the one thing that I pretty much recommend for everybody. I know we're talking about customizing diets, and I
yep.
generally try and customize as much as I can, but to the individual's genetics. But I mean, everybody has some intermittent fasting genes. It's clearly something our ancestors did. It's clearly just part of being a human. So anybody who tells you breakfast is the most important meal of the day, honestly, they're just ignorant. I mean, breakfast is definitely the most important meal of the day to skip. And the rest of it is just marketing. The idea that doctors are telling people that, which sometimes they are, is just ignorance. Again, it's just marketing. It's not science based. Even the New England Journal of Medicine has come out with stuff on the importance of intermittent fasting, and it's just so imperative. Now, exactly what that looks like for different people might differ a little bit, but everybody should be intermittent fasting.
I agree. And there's a couple things I say about this, right? One I say is that we're all intermittent fasting already because we don't eat while we're sleeping, right? So you may have at least a
Hopefully,
9-hour window that you're fasting, right? And
hopefully,
that's
some
like,
people wake
like
up
yeah,
and eat.
there are some bodybuilders that wake up and because they want to like think they have to be have so much protein and they have to like get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and do that. But we're not going to talk about that,
Yeah,
right? And we also like right now, we're fasting, right? We're talking, right? We're
sure,
not eating right now, right? This is a micro intermittent fast, right? In a way, right?
sure.
We're just, you know, there's different things happening that way. I do say this. I do say that there's a couple things, right? And I combine this with their sleep schedule. So
Mhm.
like I'm a night person, I was up till 2:30 in the morning, and here we are, I was up, at 9:30 or before that, 8 o'clock this morning.
Mhm.
Right. And that's my window for sleeping. And so I'm not hungry in the morning. Never was hungry in the morning. My parents forced me to eat breakfast. Breakfast was the most important meal of the day. The
Yeah.
same thing, right?
Yeah.
And then when I read the Warrior Diet,
Mhm.
it said skip breakfast, and it gave me permission to do it. It was like my Roger Bannister, right? It's like, oh, wait a minute, I can skip breakfast and listen to my body and only eat when I'm hungry.
Yep.
Now, some people are morning people, and I do look at this a lot. And I wrote a book on sleep, and if you want to download it, you can go to my website strongforlonger.com, and a pop up will pop up. Give me your email address, and you can get your money back by just unsubscribing the next time I send a message out, right? So, right? But just get the book. The book will either put you to sleep because it's so boring, or to give you all these tools to fall asleep. One of the two, right? Right. but but my point is this, right? Is that if somebody's a morning person, like my friend Bob Wholesale, he's 78 years old, he fasts, he does keto. He used to calorie count when he had to look in a book before there were an app or Excel spreadsheets, and he has journals still of him
Right.
having to calculate these things out. And
Mhm.
but he skips dinner. He eats breakfast when he gets up.
Yep.
He loves breakfast. He then eats at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then nothing after that, unless he's going to dinner with family or friends or has people over to his house or something like that. and I go over there and help him cook men's breakfast for some church group and things like that. And I've been helping Bob. I did it 5 years straight. And then I was out living in Colorado and California, and I couldn't do it. But a lot of times I go over there now, I help him cook breakfast. I carve the flank steak. I do all these things, right? And I don't even eat. I sit there and drink my bulletproof coffee while they're all eating, because that's not my window, right? I'm just not hungry, right?
Same. Yeah, I do the same sort of thing.
Right. And so, but my point is that intermittent fasting, I agree 110%, is the one thing. And if we could extend that out, right, to do all these benefits of, like, like mTOR suppression, human growth hormone, right, all these different things, the autophagy aspect of those things, if you go long enough, right, and start tapping into those benefits of lower inflammation and your body cleaning itself up, and eating away the bad cells and giving yourself more energy and those type of things. I could talk for days about this, you can see, right? So, but I agree. But then when you eat breakfast, that is your breakfast, and that is important. But it doesn't have to be within minutes of waking up as you're rushing out the door to go to work or whatever you're doing, right? It could be later. And
exactly. Well, especially in the context of these chemicals too. I mean, you want your body to increase autophagy, some of these recycling processes, some of these trash taking processes that get the trash out, And by the way, the sauna is another great solution, because they've done studies. They call them BUS studies, blood, urine, and sweat, BUS.
Okay.
And basically they have groups of people that go in the sauna, groups of people that don't go in the sauna. And the ones that go in the sauna, they sweat out a ton of these chemicals. You can pick them up on skin patches where they rip off the patch, they measure the chemicals. If you're not in the sauna, you basically have zero chemicals on those skin patches. Then they go in the sauna. And by the way, the groups of people that are in the saunas, the ones that aren't in the saunas, also are not peeing out any of these chemicals hardly. You look at their urine tests in those same blood, urine, and sweat tests as BUS studies. There's virtually none of these chemicals in their urine, but then there's tons of them on the sauna groups when they check the skin patch. So you sweat them out. Right. So definitely sweat.
Well, yeah, that was one of the mistakes I made when I first started doing the Wim Hof method. I never did anything to get hot. Right. I was always on the cold side. And I went to see a naturopath doctor here. He's like head of the board of First State of Utah, Dr. Jeffrey Wright. And he was like, you got to do both. You got to break a sweat too.
Yeah.
And I mean, if it's 30 degrees outside and your house is at 68, 69, it's like I could work out for 20 minutes and in this dry humidity barely break a sweat, right? And do that. Yep. But if you actually watch Wim Hof, the documentaries, like the Vice documentary and those type of things, he goes into the sauna with a beer, right? He goes into the sauna, right? And hangs out in the sauna to warm up and do that. Right. And he never brings that up, but if you watch his actual practice, he does that.
Exactly.
And Dr. Rhonda Patrick is like the one like really spearheading this and flying the flag of all these Finnish style saunas. And I'm going to build one. I'm going to build one in the backyard, right? And
a lot of people do. Yeah, I think you should.
I am
right now, with all the saunas being shut down, which I think is absurd. It's crazy they're shutting down these health facilities, which I think the gyms and the saunas are more of a health facility than most of the supposed health facilities in our country today. But you almost have to build them yourself the way the country has gone.
It's amazing. And, gosh, this is, you and I could talk about this stuff. I think we could do another 4 hours. Right?
Oh, easy.
Probably.
Yeah, right.
Easy, right, easy. Yeah. I'd love to have you, if you're willing, have you back on one day soon. This is episode 67, and I've had 0 repeat guests. And so I've probably had over 50 guests, and I haven't had a repeat, but I'd love at some point to have you back on.
Sure.
I know you're working on a new book on testosterone, right? Are you still noodling away at that?
Yeah, I've got a bunch, actually. I've got a few books up in the air. It's just so difficult with all the stuff I do to commit to deadlines on the books. Books are hard. I mean, with 4 kids, it's harder than I was anticipating, but yeah, I definitely am working on some. So, again, I unfortunately can't say like, here's the deadline, watch for this, whatever, but people should definitely, hopefully expect a book coming soon. What is soon? I don't know.
Well, either before that or when you're doing your rounds to promote that. I'd love to have you back on to talk about those things. whatever you're working on. And so you mentioned that you do consulting. People can find you at AJ Consulting Company. And
Yeah.
when I was looking at your website this morning, you're doing a promotion, like a 50% promotion for the DNA testing, right?
Yeah. And that's unusual. In like 3 years, I didn't run any sales at all. So I feel like with COVID, people need to start optimizing their health. And, again, they're not hearing this from government employees and whatnot. They're just talking about masks. People need to start paying attention to vitamin D for sure. I mean, there was a study with COVID. They had 600 people in the ICU that were literally dying. A lot of them did die.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these were mostly, elderly citizens for the most part. But again, a lot of them died among these 600. And everybody, if their vitamin D was above 40, 0 deaths.
Mm.
And this just seems to be like the pattern over and over in all the studies coming out. And nobody's talking about it, right? And there's other little things you can do too. And again, like just general, like optimizing your health and your metabolism. I mean, you're doing yourself a huge favor, irrespective of COVID and all that, just in general for your health. It's a great long-term investment. So I appreciate you mentioning it.
You're welcome, because, the thing about this show is that, even though I have coaching clients and, and putting together group coaching and courses and those type of things, the show is, I think is a selfish pursuit. I get to talk to somebody like you, uninterrupted, except when their comment or question comes in,
Mm-hmm.
For an hour, right? Plus the little beginning time, but then also get to, be a conduit and expose the listeners to somebody else's opinion and those things. And so I'm happy to highlight the fact that you're looking for clients. And I even know that for years you only worked with professional athletes, right? And then now you opened it up to just the regular people like us, right? So
Yep. Yeah. And I have a contract with the Special Forces. I do DNA consulting with their operators, but yeah, just normal lay people need to be healthy too. I mean,
right.
like I want everybody to be healthy. I don't want to try and exclude people.
Right.
And it's pretty low hanging fruit to just get your genetics done nowadays. It used to, the very first time somebody did their full genome, it was over $1 billion.
Right.
So
Right.
a little bit of a high bar.
Right. And now someone like me, right, can have a 23andMe affiliate, link,
Exactly.
right.
For like $100.
And do that. Yeah, exactly. And you can go get it done. It's, it's super interesting. Like I've heard like, was it Dr. Ken Berry? I don't know if you know who Dr. Ken Berry is, right?
Good friend of mine. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw him on the Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu, right. And
Mm-hmm.
he said, he did his genetics, right. And he goes, I have more Cro-Magnon DNA, right, than 97% of the population. So he
Right.
does really well on like a carnivore style diet because of that.
Interesting.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like having that type of data is like, like it's almost like the old like your diet based off blood type, almost right, like you're right. That was kind of like the precursor to where we are now, right? It's like, well, if you're like I'm O positive, right? That'll be, you're like, well, you do good on eating meat and do those type of things. Well, but here's the thing. My wife's O positive too, but she has a completely different microbiota than I do, right?
Yeah.
Completely different, right? Because it was passed down from her generations. And I think that people who are closer to their ancestry, like coming across from Europe or wherever they come from, have a different microbiome that people who are like me. My ancestral line dates back to the Mayflower on my mom's side, right? So Americans have been doing the wrong thing for a long time, right? I've got the worst end of the short end of the stick, so to speak, right? And so my wife and I can do a alkalinity test, and she's more alkaline than I am naturally, right? We can eat the same foods and I may have a reaction to something and she doesn't, or she eats something and it doesn't agree with her and it does agree with me. And sleep cycles are different. She's a morning person. I'm a night person. So we just everybody's individual, right? It's really an amazing thing, right?
Yeah. And the only way to stay optimized is just to, you've got to figure that out for yourself. I mean, that's why Socrates, one of my favorite quotes is to know thyself. He went to the oracle at Delphi and the oracle told him he was the smartest person in the world. And he said, no, I'm not that smart. Like what makes me so smart? I don't think I'm the smartest person. The Delphic oracle basically said, it's because you know yourself. You're not egotistical about it. You know your shortcomings, your flaws.
Mhm.
You know your strengths, you know yourself, and that's really a powerful skill extended to health.
It is, right? Because there's so many there's so many conflicting things out in the world, right? Where it's
Mhm.
like, like people are even asking that, that know what they're talking about. It's like, do you recommend keto or paleo? And the thing is that for John Jensen, we don't know, right?
Right.
We,
Yeah,
right? You and
exactly.
I know that what works for us, right? And we're very similar,
Hmm.
but somebody else might need, something completely different, right? Because they may, like I said, they may not be able to process, beta carotene into vitamin A, right? They just
Hmm.
may not be able to do that. So it's like all these, like, for instance, I had, about sixth grade, I got glasses, right?
Hmm.
I couldn't even read the big E on this chart, right? I mean, it
Wow.
was like so bad, right?
Sounds like me. Yeah.
Yeah, I was racing go-karts, and my dad, was, and this was like when, but as I was starting to get good, and I was like at a state level race in South
Wow.
Carolina,
Wow.
and
You
yeah,
always see a blur.
yeah, I did, right? He was like, my dad was like, you were catching the, in practice, and he was like, you were catching the guy in front of you, and I was like, well, who was it? He was like, what do you mean? I was like, who was it? I couldn't tell who it was. It
Wow.
was just a blur, right? I
Yeah.
could see that there was a blurry go-kart in front of me, and
Wow.
I was catching them, but I couldn't. So here I am driving at like 60 miles an hour. I'm like in sixth grade, right? That age, and I can't even see. And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, it's blurry. He's like, well, we got to get you some glasses, right? And and then I was told, well, eat carrots. Your eyes will get better if you eat carrots. And I was
Exactly.
eating carrots like there was no tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the only thing that fixed my vision was LASIK, right? When I was
Yeah.
in my 30s, right?
Exactly.
And but here's the thing, right? Right after I did LASIK, okay, right after I did LASIK, then started getting into the intermittent fasting and those type of things. I'm 48 years old and I don't need readers. These are just blue blockers, right? I
Yeah.
don't. So my vision, I didn't have to get my vision, my LASIK redone. I still
Mhm.
got like the Superman level 20, they call it 2022, where I can read two or three things off the 2015 line. It's
Mhm.
almost like printed in China is what I could read. I mean, it's just like amazing stuff, right?
Right. Awesome.
But people are blown away that I turned 49 in just a couple months, and that I'm not playing the trombone. I'm not like, doing that. I'm just like just reading stuff, right?
Exactly.
And I think it has to do with like my epigenetic expression, that starting at, 40 years old, that I started doing a lot of things right,
Yeah.
and carrying that on.
I agree. Yeah.
Yep. And people, like one of my favorite quotes is this, and then we can start wrapping it up because we're hitting an hour. But is that the best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago?
Right.
The
Right.
second best time is today, right?
Sure. Oh yeah.
You, and because like you may have all the wrong personal products like the deodorant, the shampoos, and the toothpaste, and all those things, but you can go out today or order them on Amazon. You can go to ajconsultingcompany.com and click on what I use and see all these things and click on the links and go
Mhm.
down the trail
Yeah.
and start replacing those things one at a time or all at once,
Yeah.
and make that and plant that seed today, no matter what age you are,
Yeah.
and start letting your body heal itself and do that stuff.
Yeah. That's about as good as I could have said. That's perfect, man. I appreciate it. I agree with you.
Thank you. Thank you. So just if you could give, I mean, you've already given like this, like start with the personal hygiene stuff and those type of things. You
Yeah.
drinking water is super important. And I know you actually have on that list like a reverse osmosis system.
Oh
Um,
yeah. The
yeah,
best. It doesn't have any plastic tank under your sink. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so we need one actually. Ours busted. So I'm gonna show that to my wife and see what we can do about getting that one in because
Yep.
is it like on the next level? Could you, because, I'm thinking about, chlorine absorption and stuff through the skin when you take a shower, right? Is the next level would be like getting that type of system for your whole house, right? Or,
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'd go as far as reverse osmosis for the whole house. I mean, Joseph Mercola's got like some crazy 6 foot tall system in his house, like for his whole house. I have a
okay.
whole house activated charcoal system myself, but I also do reverse osmosis for the drinking water. But I've got kids, and the kids are like playing in the bathtub and drinking the water and stuff. So I feel like, you know, I take it a little bit higher. And part of it, it's my business and things like that. Like I pay attention to all this stuff more than most people. I think that reverse osmosis system is a phenomenal investment above and beyond a whole house. Like if I had to choose between a whole house filter or the reverse osmosis, I would choose the reverse osmosis because what you're drinking is definitely more interacting with your biochemistry than what you're putting on your skin.
Right.
And that system, it's got activated charcoal, and then it does the reverse osmosis filter. And then after that, it remineralizes. So it puts magnesium back into it. And then it all has a pump. So you never have a, again, you don't have a plastic storage tank. And I installed mine myself. So it's not impossible to do if you can, if you have a spigot thing or you know how to drill into your granite or whatever, which is tricky, but it's doable. It's not impossible.
My sink has a hole in it, right? And so I
just even better.
Right in that spot, right?
Perfect. Yeah, that's the hardest part is drilling through the marble or whatever you have. Yeah.
Right. Well, exactly. Right. You always could get somebody to come in to put that in for you if you need to. I mean, if you really care enough about getting it, put it in. But a lot of houses have it, and you could just replace it, and and do that stuff. And so super great interview. I'm so thankful for you being on, and for Johanna, introducing us and doing that. And again, she was on the episode 63 just last week, and such short notice come on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Good to talk to you.
It's my pleasure. And we'll stay in touch, and I'm excited to see your future things coming out. Right. Thanks. I really am. And really expanding on this because it's just been people's blind spot. It's just it's just amazing. Right. And we got one more comment coming in from John, and then we'll wrap this up. We'll roll the credits here. And it says, true. I also think people should do their own research on the best way for them to eat rather than pick a diet to do.
Yep. Perfect.
Yep, exactly. I mean, you can't sum it up better than that, right? Because, it comes down to testing, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's like, if I wake up in the morning and I feel amazing, I'm like, what did I do yesterday? Right.
Yeah.
Right? What did I do yesterday to feel amazing today? Because it's not like I just woke up feeling amazing. And I'll take some notes on that. Like, when did I eat? What did I eat? How much sleep did I get? Right. Those type of things. And then if I wake up and I feel like crap, I'm doing the same thing. What did I do yesterday?
Yeah.
Right. Because, and I equate this to this, I think I've been around a lot of, food and beverage in my life. Right. And so what I really realized was, if I'm hungover, right, back in the day when I used to drink a lot, right, I'm hungover the day after, right? I feel great in the moment, right?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like in the moment when you're having the wine or the shot of tequila or the whiskey, I've worked in one restaurant that had 450 beers, so I've learned a lot about beer. I worked in restaurants that have had like 600 wines, right? High-end steakhouses with all these wines, right? Know a lot about wine, right? And then I worked in a place, I was a GM of a restaurant that had 1,100 whiskeys from around the world.
Wow.
I could go for days about, right, the four regions of Scotch with the two sub-regions, and what's the difference between a Scotch and an Irish whiskey, and what makes bourbon, and what makes Canadian whiskey, and they're the only ones that can add flavorings and all these different things. So I love the art of that, right? And, of those type of things. And even like and I could go on, but my point is like the connection to Earth. Like if you watch the documentary on Hulu, Neat, one of the youngest female master distiller, I think maybe the first female master distiller, talks about those 40 acres of white non-GMO corn that's grown in Kentucky that's going to go into a barrel made from the 75-year-old white oak tree that's on the same land. You're literally like getting so much of Kentucky's, flavors into it, right? The soil and all those type of things. But what happens is that you go in and overindulge. The next day is where you don't feel good. So what happens is how you feel today is based off what you did the day before, right? Is what I'm really saying. You can really kind of track that down for yourself. Like you can start just doing the self-experiment. Why do I feel good today? And why do I feel bad today? Or what did I do yesterday to cause these things? And you can kind of narrow it down.
Right.
Yep. And when you don't have someone like you to give you the DNA test, right, and do the consulting.
Yeah, it's lifelong. I mean, even if you do the DNA, it's always a lifelong experience, right? I mean, you're just going to have different inputs, different environments, different stressors. It's constant. So to become a true master, and just being aware and really being observant about what's going on, like you're saying, I think is valuable, even when you have all the testing and all the technology and everything else.
Right. It gives a good launching point, right? Though
Mm-hmm.
when you do that, right? And I'm super interested, as things start flowing for me and I get to the point, that because people send me things and I'm testing Dr. Linda Ellison's Caillou Health, her wellness immunity supplement. I'm testing that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm testing some smart Java from Hudson. And so as I get to the point where it's like I get through these things and we go, okay, I'll contact you and like I want to run through this. So and then maybe we could do a follow-up episode based like on what my stuff is and like just
Right.
lay it out there, right?
Right.
And yep, and that would be really cool too.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it.
All right. So
All right.
we're gonna wrap it up. Yeah, I know you probably got to run. I got things to do as well, and this is a live show, and but it's great.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's amazing show. Go out and buy his book. Your book is Estrogeneration.
Mm-hmm.
Estrogenetics are making you. Why are they making you, or how they are making you fat, sick, and infertile? Right.
You got it.
Exactly. Well, thanks for everybody being on the show. I'm just going to wrap it up here. I'm going to roll the credits, and you guys take care, and we'll see you again next time. Cheers.
Great.